Objects in JavaScript allow us to hold multiple values assigned to one variable. So let's create our first object, and creating it as a const, as objects are going to be referencing a memory location. So even though we're using const, which typically as a variable won't allow us to reassign a value to it, we're not actually going to be reassigning a value. We're going to be just updating the values that are assigned to that location. So it references a memory location, so setting it up for a person. And an object can contain, just like the arrays, multiple different data types, such as strings, numbers, booleans. It can also contain arrays and objects itself. And as well, it can also contain functions, which are known as methods within the object. So let's set one up for the first name and assign a first name value to it. So objects are also a collection of properties and values separated by a semicolon. So setting up the name, first name, and then for last name, and then also assign a value to the last name. And if you're familiar with JSON data, and JSON data is based off of JavaScript objects, the format is similar. The difference with JSON is you do need to use the double quotes. You don't have an option for single quotes. With JavaScript objects, it's a whole lot more flexible. You can use the double quotes, you can use the single quotes, and also for the property, you don't need to quote around it at all. So this way it will still reference that value unless you're using a value that's more complex and it's got spaces, then of course then you do need to have the quotes around it. And that's also possible in JSON data as well. So for age, so we've done a couple strings, let's do a number. And then within the console, we're going to output the value of person. And save, refresh. And now we've got all of this data that's contained within that one object, and which makes it really easy to reference the contents of the object. So there's a number of ways to get the content out of the object. So there's the dot notation and the bracket notation. So the dot notation is probably one of the most common ways to do that. So you'd reference the main container object and then the property value that you want to reference the value of. So this is an example of the dot notation. So you just do the main object dot and whatever the property is, and it's going to return back the value. So this way you can also assign values. So if we do person first and we want to assign a value to it, and let's update that person object with a new value. Now that person is going to have that updated value. And the reason that we are once again able to do this is because this object is referencing a memory location. So it's not as much referencing a particular object, it's just a location. So if we were to set up another variable, another object, and assign person to person1, and now if I output person1, it's going to be referencing that first original person object. And if I take person1 and first, and I update the value of first, what do you think is going to happen to person1, and what do you think is going to happen to person? So these are, once again, they're referencing that same memory location, and that's what's tying them together. So if you make updates to one, then it's going to update the other one. So just over here, we're assigning the value of the first object person to person1, and it's tying them together. So that allows us to make updates as needed. There's also the bracket notation. So if we do bracket notation, and this is similar to what we found with the arrays, and then just within here, we just need to reference the property name. So in this case, let's look at age. So person, bracket notation, and then the property that we want to return back. We can also assign different values to it. So if we want to reassign the value of age to 100, and then we look at person1, and we see that that's also updated, and it's also updated within person. So go ahead and try this out and take a look at the JavaScript objects and how you can assign values to them.